The wolves came back on a Tuesday. Ethan Calloway heard them before dawn, low, hungry sounds drifting across the prairie like smoke. He'd been awake anyway, sitting at the kitchen table with a kerosene lamp burning low and a bank notice spread flat under his calloused hands. The paper was 3 weeks old. The ink might as well have been blood. Foreclosure proceedings to commence August 15th, 1885. That gave him 6 days. He folded the notice slowly, creasing it along the same worn lines he'd traced 100 times before, and set it aside. The coffee in his tin cup had gone cold hours ago, but he drank it anyway. Waste wasn't something a man could afford, not anymore. Not when the cattle were thin, the fence posts were rotting, and the well was running dry faster than he could dig it deeper. The wolves howled again, closer this time. Ethan pushed back from the table and reached for his rifle. Outside, the Wyoming summer hit him like a fist, dry heat already building even though the sun hadn't cleared the eastern ridge. The land stretched out in every direction, hard-packed dirt and scrub grass that barely came up to a man's ankle. 3 years ago, this place had looked different, greener somehow, fuller. Mary had planted wildflowers along the porch, talked about chickens and maybe a garden if the rain held. The rain hadn't held, and Mary was buried on the hill behind the house, under a wooden cross Ethan had carved himself, because the town preacher wanted $12 for a proper stone. He didn't think about that now. Couldn't afford to. The cattle were clustered near the broken section of fence line he'd been meaning to fix for 2 months. A dozen head, maybe less, down from 40 when he'd started. The wolves watched from the ridge, gray shadows against the pale morning sky. One of them was big, nearly the size of a calf, with eyes that caught the light wrong. Ethan raised the rifle. The shot cracked across the valley, sharp and clean. The big wolf yelped and disappeared over the ridge. The others scattered. It wouldn't last. They'd be back tonight, or the next night, or the night after that. Wolves didn't give up when they smelled weakness. Neither did Banks. Ethan lowered the rifle and stood there in the dust, watching the cattle shift and settle. One of the cows was limping, cut herself on the broken wire probably. He'd have to check that later, wrap it if it looked bad. Not that it mattered much. Even if he kept every head alive until next week, it wouldn't be enough to cover what he owed. He was 43 years old, and he'd run out of moves. The town of Red Hollow was an 8-mile ride southeast, and Ethan made the trip every Thursday to pick up supplies he couldn't afford and listen to gossip he didn't care about. Today was Thursday. He almost didn't go, almost stayed on the ranch and let the world keep turning without him. But he needed nails for the fence, and if he didn't fix it soon, he wouldn't have any cattle left to lose. So he saddled the mare, checked the rifle, and rode out under a sky that looked like hammered tin. Red Hollow wasn't much of a town. A main street of packed dirt, a general store, a saloon that doubled as a boarding house, a church with a steeple that leaned slightly west. The train depot sat at the far end, a squat wooden building with a platform that had seen better days. Most people passed through Red Hollow on their way to somewhere else. The ones who stayed did so because they'd run out of options or run out of money, and sometimes both. Ethan tied the mare outside the general store and went in. Calloway. The man behind the counter didn't look up. His name was Briggs, and he'd been running the store for as long as Ethan could remember. "You settle that account yet?" "Working on it." "That's what you said last month." "I know what I said." Briggs finally looked up, his expression flat. "I can't keep carrying you, Ethan. I got bills same as you. I need nails." "You got money for nails?" Ethan set $2 on the counter. It was half of what he had left in the world. Briggs stared at it like it might bite him, then sighed and pulled a box of nails from the shelf. "This doesn't clear your account." "I know. You're 3 months behind." "I know." Briggs handed over the nails. "Mary would have hated seeing you like this." Ethan took the box and walked out. He was halfway to the mare when he heard the train whistle. The sound cut through the heat like a blade, high and sharp. Ethan stopped, turned, watched the locomotive pull into the station trailing black smoke and cinder ash. Trains came through Red Hollow twice a week, Tuesdays and Thursdays, bringing mail, freight, and the occasional stranger looking for cheap land or a fresh start. Usually, Ethan didn't pay attention, but today something made him look. The passengers who stepped off were the usual sort: a couple of ranch hands heading west, a traveling salesman with a heavy case, an older woman clutching a carpet bag. And then, last, a figure in a long traveling coat and a hat pinned with a wilted flower. She stepped onto the platform carefully, like she wasn't sure the ground would hold her weight. The coat was dusty, the hem streaked with mud, but underneath it Ethan caught a flash of white fabric. A dress. A wedding dress. The woman stood there, perfectly still, scanning the platform like she was looking for someone. Her posture was straight, controlled, but her hands were shaking. Ethan could see it even from across the street, the way her fingers tightened on the handle of her small traveling case, the way her shoulders held just a little too tight. No one came to meet her. The other passengers dispersed. The ranch hands headed for the saloon. The salesman started down the main street. The older woman was met by a man in a wagon who helped her load her bag. The woman in the wedding dress didn't move. Ethan stood there with the box of nails in his hand, watching. He didn't know why. Maybe it was the way she held herself, like she was made of glass and trying not to shatter. Maybe it was the dress. Maybe it was something else, something he didn't have a name for. She waited for 20 minutes. No one came. Finally, she turned and walked slowly to the bench at the edge of the platform. She sat down, set her case beside her, and folded her hands in her lap. Her face was composed, calm, but Ethan could see the way her jaw tightened, the way she blinked a little too fast. She'd been left. He recognized that look. He'd seen it in the mirror often enough. Ethan crossed the street without thinking about it. His boots made hollow sounds on the wooden platform. The woman looked up as he approached, and for a moment their eyes met. Hers were gray, sharp, red-rimmed. "Ma'am," Ethan said. She straightened slightly, a reflex. "Yes?" "You waiting for someone?" Her mouth tightened. "I was." "They coming back?" She looked away, out at the empty street. "No." Ethan set the box of nails down on the bench. "You got somewhere to go?" "I'll manage." That wasn't the question. She turned back to him and something flickered across her face. Anger, maybe, or pride. "I don't need charity, Mr. Calloway. Ethan Calloway. Mr. Calloway." She stood, brushing dust from her coat. "I appreciate your concern, but I'm perfectly capable of— You're wearing a wedding dress." The words landed between them like a stone. Her expression didn't change, but her hands stilled. "I'm aware. Someone was supposed to meet you." "Yes." And they didn't. Clearly. Ethan studied her. She was older than most brides he'd seen, early 40s maybe, with fine lines around her eyes and threads of gray in the dark hair pinned under her hat. Her accent was Eastern, educated. Boston, maybe, or Philadelphia. The kind of voice that didn't belong in a place like Red Hollow. "What happened?" he asked. She looked at him for a long moment, and he watched her decide whether to answer. Finally, she said, "I came here to marry a man I'd been corresponding with for 6 months. His name was Thomas Whitmore. He worked as a clerk at the land office." Her voice was steady, precise, like she was reciting a lesson. "When I arrived, his family informed me that the arrangement had been reconsidered." Reconsidered. "I'm 42 years old, Mr. Calloway. Apparently that makes me unsuitable." The bitterness in her voice was quiet, controlled, but it was there. Ethan didn't say anything for a moment. Then, "What's your name?" "Clara. Clara Whitmore. I kept the name, even though—" She stopped, shook her head. "It doesn't matter." "You got money?" Her chin lifted. "Enough." "For what?" "A train ticket back east. A room for tonight, if necessary." "Back east to what?" She blinked. "I beg your pardon?" "You leave someone back there? Family? A job?" Clara's expression shuddered. "No." "Then why go back?" "Because there's nothing for me here." Ethan looked at her, really looked at her. The proud set of her shoulders, the careful way she held herself together, like if she loosened her grip for even a second, she'd fall apart completely. The wedding dress hidden under dusty wool. He thought about the ranch, the failing cattle, the foreclosure notice, the wolves. He thought about Mary's grave on the hill, and he made a decision that would have sounded insane if he'd said it out loud. So he didn't say it out loud. He just asked a question. "You know anything about teaching?" Clara frowned. "I was a school teacher in Boston for 18 years. Why?" "I got a ranch 8 miles north of here. It's not much. Barely keeping together, if I'm honest. But there's space. And there's kids around here who need schooling. I don't understand what you're suggesting. Ethan met her eyes. I'm suggesting you don't get back on that train. Mr. Calloway, I'm suggesting, he continued, that maybe we help each other. Clara stared at him. Help each other how exactly? Ethan took a breath. This was the part where a sensible man would walk away, but he hadn't felt sensible in 3 years, and he was 6 days from losing everything anyway. Marry me, he said. The words hung in the air between them. Clara's expression went very still. I beg your pardon? You heard me. You're joking. No. You don't even know me. You don't know me either. That's precisely my point, Mr. Calloway. You can't possibly be serious. I got a house, Ethan said. It needs work, but it's solid. You'd have a roof over your head, food on the table. In exchange, you could teach the local kids. Maybe help with the books. I'm not much good with numbers. It'd be a partnership, business arrangement. Clara laughed, but there was no humor in it. This is absurd. Maybe. You're asking me to marry a complete stranger. You already tried marrying someone you'd been writing to for 6 months. How'd that work out? Her face went pale, and Ethan immediately regretted the words. But before he could take them back, Clara said very quietly, That was cruel. You're right. I apologize. She looked away, her hands tightening on the handle of her case. Why would you do this? Do what? Propose marriage to a woman you've known for 10 minutes. Ethan considered the question. The honest answer was complicated, something about desperation and loneliness and the way she'd looked sitting on that bench, broken but refusing to break. But complicated wasn't something he was good with, so he settled for simple. Because I'm out of options, he said, and I think maybe you are too. Clara turned back to him slowly. That's the worst proposal I've ever heard. Probably, and I've heard some terrible ones. I don't doubt it. She studied him for a long moment, and Ethan let her look. He didn't know what she was seeing. A weathered rancher with dust in his beard and desperation in his eyes, probably. A man who'd clearly lost more than he could afford to lose. Finally, she said, This is insane. Yes. I'd be a fool to agree. Probably. I don't know you. I don't know this place. I don't know anything about ranching or frontier life or... I know. Then why, Clara said, her voice rising slightly, would I possibly say yes? Ethan looked at her. Because you're still wearing the dress. The words hit her like a slap. Her mouth opened, closed. Her hands went to the coat, pulling it tighter around herself like she could hide what was underneath. You came here for a new start, Ethan said quietly. That didn't change just because one man was an idiot. You got 2 choices now. Get back on that train and go back to nothing, or take a chance on something different. This isn't different. This is madness. Maybe that's what a new start looks like. Clara stared at him, her expression unreadable. The platform was empty now except for the 2 of them. The train sat idle on the tracks, steam hissing from the engine. In the distance, someone was hammering, rhythmic, steady, the sound of work that never ended. I don't love you, Clara said finally. I don't love you either. This wouldn't be a real marriage. It'd be real enough. I mean, we wouldn't... She stopped, her cheeks coloring slightly. There wouldn't be expectations of intimacy. I got a spare room. You'd have your own space. And if it doesn't work, then we end it. No hard feelings. Clara looked down at her hands. At the case she'd been gripping so tightly, her knuckles had gone white. Ethan watched her shoulders rise and fall with a breath that seemed to take everything she had. This is the worst idea I've ever heard, she said. Probably. I should say no. Probably. She looked up at him, and for the first time since he'd walked over, something in her expression shifted. Not hope, exactly, but maybe the absence of complete despair. If I agree, she said slowly, I want it in writing. A contract, spelling out the terms. Fine. And I keep my own income from teaching. Fair. And if either of us wants out, we can leave. No questions. Agreed. Clara took another breath. The preacher will think we're insane. Let him. The whole town will talk. They already do. She almost smiled at that. Almost. Then she set down her case, straightened her shoulders, and held out her hand. All right, Mr. Calloway, she said. Let's do something monumentally stupid. Ethan shook her hand. Her grip was firm, steady, the hand of someone who'd made hard decisions before. "Call me Ethan." "Clara." They stood there for a moment, two strangers holding hands on an empty train platform, bound together by nothing but desperation and a handshake. Then Ethan picked up the box of nails, and Clara picked up her case, and they walked together down the main street toward the church. Etched. The preacher's name was Howell, and he was drunk. Not falling down drunk, but drunk enough that his eyes were glassy, and his words came out slightly slurred. He blinked at Ethan and Clara standing in the doorway of the small church, then blinked again like he was trying to make them disappear. "Calloway?" he said. "Reverend." "What do you want?" "We need to get married." Howell looked at Clara, then back at Ethan. "Who's this?" "Clara Whitmore." "We're getting married." "When?" "Now." Howell laughed, a wet, rattling sound. "You're joking." "No. You can't just walk in here and—" "Yes, we can," Clara said quietly. Her voice had an edge to it now, the kind of tone that made people stop talking. "We can, and we will. Can you perform the ceremony or not?" Howell stared at her. "You want to marry this man? I wouldn't be here otherwise." "You know him?" "I know enough." "Do you?" Howell leaned forward, squinting. "Because Ethan Calloway's got a failing ranch, a pile of debts, and a mean streak when he drinks. You sure you want to hitch yourself to that?" Ethan's jaw tightened, but before he could say anything, Clara stepped forward. "And I," she said calmly, "am a 42-year-old spinster who crossed the country to marry a man who abandoned me at the train station. We all have our failures, Reverend. Can you perform the ceremony or not?" Howell blinked. Then he laughed again, but this time there was something almost admiring in it. "You two deserve each other," he muttered. "Fine. Let's get this over with." The ceremony took 7 minutes. There were no flowers, no music, no guests. Just Ethan and Clara standing in front of a dusty altar while Howell read from a Bible that looked like it had seen better days. His words were rushed, mechanical, the kind of thing he'd said 100 times before. "Do you, Ethan Calloway, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." "Do you, Clara Whitmore, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Clara hesitated. It was just a second, barely noticeable, but Ethan saw it, saw the doubt flicker across her face, the moment where she almost said no. Then she said, "I do." "Then by the power vested in me, I pronounce you man and wife. You can kiss if you want, but frankly, I don't care." Ethan and Clara looked at each other. They didn't kiss. Howell handed them a marriage certificate that looked like it had been filled out in a hurry, took the $5 Ethan gave him, and waved them out. "Good luck," he called after them. "You're going to need it." The door closed behind them, and they stood on the church steps in the fading afternoon light. Married. Legally, officially married to a person they'd met less than 2 hours ago. Clara looked down at the certificate in her hands. "What have we done?" "I don't know," Ethan said honestly. "This is insane." "You said that already." "I'm saying it again." Ethan glanced at her. She was still holding herself together, but barely. The careful composure she'd worn on the train platform was starting to crack, and he could see the fear underneath. "We can still back out," he said quietly. "Howell's drunk enough he probably won't even remember this tomorrow. We could tear up the certificate and walk away." Clara looked at him, her gray eyes searching his face. "Is that what you want?" "I'm asking what you want." She was quiet for a long moment. Then she folded the certificate carefully and tucked it into her coat pocket. "I want," she said slowly, "to not get back on that train." Ethan nodded. "All right then. All right." They walked back to the main street together. The sun was starting to dip toward the western ridge, painting the sky in shades of copper and rust. A few people were out, shopkeepers closing up for the day, ranch hands heading to the saloon. Every single one of them stopped and stared. News traveled fast in Red Hollow. Ethan ignored them. Clara kept her eyes forward, her chin up, her steps measured and deliberate. If she was afraid, she didn't show it. The mare was still tied outside the general store. Ethan untied her, then turned to Clara. "You ever ride a horse?" "Not often." "It's 8 miles to the ranch. We could get a wagon, but it'd take longer." Clara looked at the mare, then at the gathering twilight. "I can ride." Ethan helped her up first. She managed it awkwardly, the traveling coat and hidden wedding dress making it harder, then swung up behind her. The mare shifted under the extra weight but settled quickly. They rode out of Red Hollow as the first stars began to appear. Neither of them looked back. Zack. The ranch appeared out of the darkness like a ghost. Clara saw it first as shapes against the starlight. A house, a barn, a few scattered outbuildings. As they got closer, the details emerged. Peeling paint, sagging porch steps, a roof that looked like it had missing shingles. The barn door was hanging crooked. The fence line was held together with wire and hope. This was where she was going to live. Ethan dismounted first, then helped Clara down. Her legs were shaky from the ride, and she had to steady herself against the mare's flank for a moment. "It's not much," Ethan said. Clara looked at the house. "No," she agreed quietly. "It's not. I'll show you inside." The front door stuck. Ethan had to put his shoulder into it to get it open. The interior was dark, so he lit a lamp, and Clara got her first real look at her new home. One main room that served as kitchen, dining area, and sitting space. A stone fireplace that looked functional but hadn't been used in a while. A table with 2 chairs, a counter with a water basin, and a few mismatched dishes. Everything was clean, but sparse. Empty. "Bedroom's through there," Ethan said, pointing to a door on the left. "Spare room's on the right. That'll be yours." Clara walked to the spare room and pushed open the door. A narrow bed, a small table, a single window that looked out over the dark prairie. The mattress was thin, and there was dust on the floor, but it was private. Her own space, like he'd promised. She set down her case and turned around. Ethan was standing in the doorway, watching her. "I know it's not what you're used to," he said. "How would you know what I'm used to? Your accent, your clothes, the way you hold yourself. You came from money." Clara's mouth tightened. "Not anymore." "What happened?" "That's none of your business." "Fair enough." They stood there in awkward silence for a moment. Then Clara said, "I should change. This dress is—" She looked down at herself, at the white fabric showing beneath the dusty coat. "I should change. There's water in the basin if you want to wash up. Not much, but it's clean." "Thank you." Ethan nodded and turned to leave, then stopped. "Clara?" "Yes?" I know today was—" He stopped, searching for words. "I just want you to know you don't have to be afraid. I'm not going to hurt you." Clara looked at him, the stranger she'd married, and saw the sincerity in his face. It didn't make her less afraid, but it made her feel, for the first time since stepping off that train, like maybe she hadn't made a complete mistake. "All right," she said quietly. Ethan left, closing the door behind him. Clara stood alone in the small room, her heart pounding. She took off the coat first, then the hat. Then, slowly, she began unbuttoning the wedding dress. It was a beautiful dress. She'd spent months saving for it, working extra hours at the school, skipping meals to put aside a little more. White silk with lace at the collar and cuffs. The kind of dress a woman wore when she believed in happy endings. She folded it carefully and set it on the bed. Then she sat down, put her face in her hands, and let herself shake. Ethan stood in the main room staring at nothing. What the hell had he done? He'd married a woman he didn't know, brought her to a failing ranch with no future, promised her security he couldn't guarantee and a life he could barely maintain himself. And for what? He didn't have a good answer. The truth was, when he'd seen her sitting on that bench, wearing that dress, looking like the whole world had just told her she wasn't good enough, something in him had recognized something in her. The same hollow emptiness he saw in the mirror every morning, the same sense of being used up and thrown away. And he'd thought, just for a second, that maybe 2 broken people could hold each other up long enough to not fall apart completely. But now, standing in the dark house with a stranger behind a closed door, that thought seemed insane. Ethan walked outside and stood on the porch. The night was clear, the stars bright and cold. In the distance, he heard the wolves howling again. They'd be back soon, testing the fence line, looking for weakness. Everything was looking for weakness. He thought about the bank notice. 6 days. Less than that now. Even if Clara could teach, even if she brought in a little money, it wouldn't be enough. Not in time. The ranch was going under, and he'd just dragged someone else down with him. Behind him, the door opened. Clara stepped out onto the porch. She'd changed into a simple dark dress, buttoned high at the throat. Her hair was unpinned, falling loose around her shoulders. Without the coat and hat, she looked younger and more tired. "Couldn't sleep?" Ethan asked. "Haven't tried yet." They stood side by side, not touching, looking out at the dark prairie. "I'm sorry," Ethan said finally. "For what?" "For dragging you into this mess." Clara was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You didn't drag me. I chose to come." "You didn't know what you were choosing." "Neither did you." She had a point. "I'll understand if you want to leave," Ethan said. "First thing in the morning, I can take you back to town. Put you on the train. No hard feelings." Clara looked at him. "Is that what you want?" "I want you to have a choice." "I had a choice on that platform. I made it." "You can unmake it." "So can you." Ethan met her eyes. "I don't want to." "Neither do I," Clara said quietly. "Not yet, anyway." They stood there in the silence, and slowly, Ethan felt something shift. Not hope. Hope was too fragile, too dangerous. But maybe the absence of complete despair. "All right then," he said. "All right." The wolves howled again, and this time Clara flinched. "What is that?" she asked. "Wolves. They've been circling the cattle for weeks. Can't you stop them?" "I try, but there's only one of me and there's a whole pack of them." Clara looked out at the darkness. "What happens if they get the cattle?" "Then I lose the ranch." "When?" 6 days. She turned to him, her expression sharp. "You're that close?" "Closer." "And you thought marrying me would help with that?" "I thought—" Ethan stopped, then started again. "I don't know what I thought. I saw you on that bench, and I stopped thinking clearly." Clara laughed, but it was a bitter sound. "That makes 2 of us." They stood there for another moment. Then Clara said, "I'm going to bed." "All right. Good night, Ethan." "Good night, Clara." She went back inside, and Ethan heard the door to the spare room close softly. He stayed on the porch until the wolves stopped howling, until the stars wheeled overhead and the moon began to set. Then he went inside, lay down on his bed fully clothed, and stared at the ceiling until dawn. Tomorrow, he thought, everything would look different. Tomorrow, they'd figure out what the hell they'd done. Tomorrow, they'd start trying to survive. Clara woke to the sound of hammering. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. The bed was too narrow, the ceiling too low, the air smelling of dust and old wood instead of the lavender sachets she'd kept in her Boston boarding house. Then memory crashed back. The train platform, the wedding dress, the stranger she'd married, the ride through darkness to a ranch that looked like it was held together by stubbornness and spite. She sat up slowly, her body aching from the unfamiliar mattress and the long ride. Through the thin walls, she could hear the rhythmic pounding continuing outside. She dressed quickly in the same dark dress from last night, pinned up her hair, and stepped out into the main room. Ethan wasn't inside. The kitchen area looked exactly as it had the night before. Sparse, clean, empty. No breakfast laid out, no fire in the stove. She walked to the window and saw him out by the broken fence line, stripped down to his undershirt despite the early morning chill, driving posts into the hard ground with a sledgehammer. Clara watched him work for a moment. Each swing was precise, controlled, the motion of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. But there was something desperate in the rhythm too, like he was trying to outrun something that was gaining on him. She looked around the kitchen, found a tin of coffee grounds and a battered pot. The stove took her 3 tries to light. The damper was tricky and she wasn't used to wood heat, but eventually she got it going. While the coffee brewed, she explored the cupboards. A sack of flour, some dried beans, salt pork that looked questionable, a jar of molasses. Not much to work with. The coffee was ready when Ethan came back inside. He stopped in the doorway, looking surprised to see her standing at the stove. "You made coffee," he said. "I did." "Didn't have to do that." "I wanted coffee. Seemed easier to make it than wait for someone else to." Ethan crossed to the basin and washed his hands, the water turning gray with dust. Clara poured 2 cups and set them on the table. They sat across from each other, the steam rising between them. "You sleep at all?" Clara asked. "Some." "You're a terrible liar." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Yeah." They drank in silence for a moment. The coffee was strong, bitter, nothing like the blend she'd had in Boston, but it was hot and it cleared her head. What time is it? Clara asked. Little past 6. You've been working since before dawn? Fence won't fix itself. Clara looked at him over the rim of her cup. His face was drawn, shadowed with exhaustion. His hands were rough, calloused, one knuckle split and bleeding slightly from where the hammer had slipped. How much of the fence needs fixing? She asked. Most of it. And you're doing it alone? Don't have much choice. Clara set down her cup. Show me the books. Ethan blinked. What? The ranch accounts, financial records. Show me. Why? Because you said I could help with the numbers, and because I want to know exactly how bad things are. Ethan looked at her for a long moment, like he was trying to decide whether to argue. Then he stood, walked to a wooden box on the shelf, and pulled out a ledger. He set it on the table in front of her. Clara opened it. The entries were sparse, uneven, some crossed out and rewritten. The handwriting changed partway through. Neater at the beginning, rougher later. She traced one finger down the columns, her eyes moving quickly over the numbers. It was worse than she'd expected. You owe the bank $800, she said quietly. $840. You have $73 in assets. 68 now. I spent 5 on the marriage license. Clara looked up at him. That's not even close. I know. You'd need to sell everything and it still wouldn't be enough. I know. Then what exactly was your plan? Ethan leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. Didn't have one. That's why I was sitting in the dark at 4 a.m. when the wolves showed up. Clara closed the ledger. This is impossible. Yeah. We can't fix this in 6 days, Mas. I know. Then why did you... She stopped, shook her head. Why did you bring me here if you knew it was hopeless? Ethan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, because hopeless alone is worse than hopeless with company. The honesty of it hit her like a slap. Clara looked down at her hands, at the wedding band she wasn't wearing because they hadn't had time to get rings. They'd married with nothing but words and desperation. I could teach, she said finally. Not in 6 days. No, but after. After what? After we lose the ranch. Ethan stared at her. You'd stay? I don't have anywhere else to go, remember? I could lose everything. You already told me that. I mean it, Clara. The bank forecloses. I got nothing. No house, no land, no money. We'd be starting from worse than zero. Clara met his eyes. I crossed a continent to marry a man I'd never met. I wore a wedding dress on a train for 3 days. I stood at that station for 20 minutes waiting for someone who never came. I think I can handle starting from zero. Something shifted in Ethan's expression. Not hope, but maybe the beginning of something like respect. All right, he said quietly. All right. They finished their coffee in silence. Then Ethan stood, picked up his hat, and headed for the door. Where are you going? Clara asked. Fence won't fix itself. Wait. He turned back. Clara stood. Teach me. Teach you what? Whatever I need to know. If I'm staying here, if we're doing this, I need to be useful. So teach me. Ethan looked at her standing there in her dark dress with her hair pinned up proper, looking like she belonged in a parlor, not on a failing cattle ranch. But her jaw was set, her eyes steady. You ever worked with your hands? He asked. I can learn. It's not easy work. I didn't ask if it was easy. I asked you to teach me. Ethan studied her for another moment. Then he nodded. All right, get your coat. The morning was cold and bright, the sun just clearing the eastern ridge. Clara followed Ethan out to the fence line, watching how he moved across the rough ground, automatically avoiding the worst of the rocks and gopher holes. This section here, he said, pointing to a stretch where the wire was sagging, held up by posts that leaned at odd angles, needs to be reinforced before the cattle push through again. What do I do? Ethan handed her a pair of work gloves that were too big for her hands. First, you learn to handle wire without cutting yourself open. Watch. He showed her how to grip the barbed wire, how to pull it taut without letting it slip, how to wrap it around the post and secure it. His movements were efficient, practiced. Clara watched carefully, committing each step to memory. Now you try, he said. Clara pulled on the gloves and reached for the wire. It was heavier than it looked, and the barbs caught on the glove fabric. She pulled, but the wire didn't budge. Harder, Ethan said. She pulled harder. The wire shifted slightly, then sprang back, one of the barbs catching her sleeve and tearing the fabric. Damn it, she muttered. Language, Ethan said, but there was amusement in his voice. Clara glared at him. I thought you needed help. I do, but I also need you to not get hurt in the first 5 minutes. Then tell me what I'm doing wrong. You're pulling with your arms. Use your whole body. Plant your feet, lean back, let your weight do the work. Clara tried again. This time when she pulled, she shifted her weight like he'd shown her. The wire went taut with a singing sound. Better, Ethan said. Now hold it while I secure the other end. They worked together in silence, Clara holding the wire while Ethan drove staples into the post. Her arms were shaking by the time he finished, her shoulders burning. Can I let go now? Yeah. She released the wire and stepped back, flexing her fingers. The gloves had protected her from the barbs, but her palms were already sore. How much more? She asked. Ethan looked down the fence line. About 300 yards. Clara's heart sank, but she didn't let it show on her face. Then we'd better keep going. They worked through the morning, the sun climbing higher and hotter. Clara learned to read the fence line, to spot the weak points before Ethan pointed them out. She learned the weight of the wire, the give of the posts, the way the ground fought back when you tried to drive anything into it. Her hands blistered inside the gloves. Her back ached. The torn sleeve of her dress flapped in the wind. Around noon, Ethan called a stop. We need to eat, he said. They walked back to the house. Clara's legs were shaking, and she was pretty sure she'd never been this dirty in her entire life. There was dust in her hair, under her fingernails, probably in her teeth. Inside, she found the remains of the salt pork and some stale bread. It wasn't much, but she made it work. Sliced the pork thin, fried it in the pan until it was crispy, toasted the bread over the flame. She set out 2 plates. Ethan ate like a man who'd forgotten what food tasted like when someone else made it. Clara watched him, feeling something odd in her chest. Not pride exactly, but maybe satisfaction. She'd done something useful. This is good, Ethan said. It's salt pork and old bread. Still good. They finished eating, and Ethan stood to go back outside. Clara stood too. You don't have to come, he said. You did enough this morning. We're not finished with the fence. I can handle the rest. Together is faster. Ethan looked at her, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw something in his expression that looked almost like gratitude. All right, he said. They worked through the afternoon. By the time the sun started to sink toward the western ridge, they'd repaired nearly 200 yards of fence. Clara's hands were bleeding through the gloves now, and she was pretty sure she'd pulled something in her shoulder, but the fence stood straight and strong. That'll hold, Ethan said, testing the wire one last time. Clara nodded, too tired to speak. They walked back to the house in the fading light. Inside, Clara poured water into the basin and washed her face, her hands, the back of her neck. The water turned red with blood and brown with dirt. When she looked at her palms, she could see the blisters starting to form, raw, angry welts that would hurt worse tomorrow. Let me see, Ethan said. Clara turned. He was standing behind her, holding a small tin. What's that? Salve. For the blisters. I'm fine. You're bleeding. I'll manage. Clara? His voice was quiet but firm. Let me see your hands. She held them out and he opened the tin. The salve smelled sharp, medicinal. He took her right hand gently, his own rough fingers careful as he spread the ointment over the blisters. This is going to hurt worse before it gets better, he said. I know. He bandaged both hands with strips of clean cloth, wrapping them slowly, making sure the fabric wasn't too tight. When he finished, he stepped back. Thank you, Clara said. You earned it. That night, Clara made dinner from the dried beans and the last of the salt pork. It wasn't fancy, but it was filling, and Ethan ate 2 helpings. After, they sat at the table with the ledger open between them. I've been thinking, Clara said. About? The school. You said there are children around here who need teaching. Some? Families are scattered, but yeah, there's kids. How many? Maybe a dozen within riding distance. Clara tapped her finger on the ledger. If I could get even half of them, at $2 per student per month, that's $12. It's something. It's not enough. No. Clara looked at the numbers again. What about the cattle? Can you sell any? They're collateral. Bank owns them until I pay off the loan. What about other work? Can you hire yourself out? To who? Everyone around here is struggling same as me. Clara leaned back in her chair, frustrated. Every angle she looked at, the math didn't work. 6 days wasn't enough time. 6 months wouldn't be enough. There has to be something, she said. If there was, I'd have found it. Then we're just giving up. Ethan looked at her. I'm being realistic. Realistic is another word for defeated. Realistic is knowing when you're beat. Clara felt anger flare in her chest, hot and sharp. You brought me here. You married me. You told me we could help each other, and now you're sitting there telling me it's hopeless. I'm telling you the truth. The truth is we have 6 days, and we haven't tried everything yet. What do you suggest? Clara opened her mouth, then closed it. Because she didn't have an answer. She had anger and frustration and blistered hands, but no solution. Ethan stood. I'm going to check the cattle. It's dark. I know. The wolves. I'll bring the rifle. He left before she could argue, the door closing behind him with a soft thud. Clara sat alone at the table, staring at the ledger, at the impossible numbers that refused to add up to anything but failure. She thought about Boston, about the boarding house with the creaky stairs and the landlady who watered down the soup, about the school where she'd taught for 18 years, watching other women get married and have children while she grew older and more invisible, about the letters from Thomas Whitmore, promising a new life, a fresh start, a future. All lies. But at least in Boston, she'd known what to expect. At least there, failure came slowly, in small increments, not all at once in a foreclosure notice with a 6-day deadline. Clara closed the ledger and stood. Her hands throbbed under the bandages, her back ached. She was exhausted, dirty, and angry at herself for thinking she could make a difference. She walked to her room, closed the door, and sat on the narrow bed. Through the thin walls, she could hear the wind picking up outside, rattling the loose shingles on the roof. In the distance, the wolves started howling. Clara lay down fully clothed and stared at the ceiling until she heard Ethan come back inside. His footsteps crossed the main room, paused outside her door for a moment, then continued to his own room. The house settled into silence. Clara closed her eyes and tried to sleep, but sleep wouldn't come. Instead, she lay there thinking about impossible odds and desperate choices, and the stranger sleeping one room away who'd offered her a partnership that was already falling apart. The next morning, Clara woke before dawn and made coffee. When Ethan emerged from his room, she was already at the stove, frying eggs she'd found in the henhouse out back. A henhouse she hadn't even known existed until she'd gone looking. There's chickens, she said. Ethan blinked at her. Yeah. You didn't mention chickens. Didn't seem important. We have eggs. That seems fairly important. I guess. Clara set a plate in front of him. What else haven't you mentioned? Ethan sat down, looking at the eggs like he wasn't sure they were real. What do you mean? I mean, what other assets does this ranch have that you forgot to tell me about? That's it. Some chickens, the cattle, the land. The land, Clara sat across from him. How much? 160 acres. Is it good land? Some of it. Near the creek, yeah. Rest is pretty rough. Clara thought about that while they ate. After breakfast, she went outside and walked the property, really looking at it for the first time in daylight. The house sat on a small rise, with the barn and outbuildings below. Beyond that, the land rolled away in gentle slopes, brown grass and scattered rocks. But when she walked down toward the creek bed Ethan had mentioned, she found water. Not much, but enough to keep things green for about 50 yards on either side. She stood there looking at the narrow band of green and all that brown, and an idea started to form. When she got back to the house, Ethan was working on the fence again. She walked out to him. The land near the creek, she said. Could you grow anything there? Maybe. Why? I'm thinking about the school. What about it? You said families are scattered. That means kids would have to travel to get here. Yeah. What if they didn't have to travel every day? What if they stayed? Ethan lowered the hammer. You mean boarding? I mean, we turn part of this place into a boarding school. Families pay for room and board plus tuition. Kids stay during the week, go home on weekends. Clara, We could grow food on that land by the creek, enough to feed students, and we've got space in the barn. It could be converted into sleeping quarters. That would take money we don't have. I know, but after we lose the ranch? Yes. Ethan was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You're talking about starting from nothing." "I'm talking about starting from something. Land, water, a house. That's more than nothing. The bank takes the land when they foreclose." "All of it? What do you mean?" Clara looked at him. "Is the whole 160 acres mortgaged, or just the section with the house and barn?" Ethan's expression changed. "I'd have to check the deed." "Then check it." They went back to the house, and Ethan pulled out another box of papers. He sorted through them until he found the deed, spreading it out on the table. Clara leaned over his shoulder, reading. The deed was complicated, full of legal language, but the property description was clear enough. The mortgaged section was 80 acres, the house, barn, and immediate surrounding land. The other 80 acres, the section by the creek, had been bought outright with money from Mary's family. "It's free and clear," Ethan said slowly. "The bank can't touch it." Clara felt something shift in her chest. Not hope. She wasn't ready for that yet. But possibility. "So if we lose the house," she said carefully, "we still have 80 acres of land. Land with no buildings on it. Land with water and room to build." Ethan looked at her. "You're serious about this." "Are you?" He didn't answer right away. Clara could see him thinking, running through the numbers, weighing the odds. Finally he said, "Even if we could do it, even if we kept that land and built something on it, it would take time, maybe years." So that's a long time to be married to a stranger." Clara met his eyes. "We're already married to strangers. At least this way we'd be working toward something." Ethan stared at her for another moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. "All right," he said. "Let's try." Over the next 3 days, they worked like people possessed. Ethan finished the fence repairs while Clara started cleaning out the barn, hauling out years of accumulated junk and making lists of what they'd need for repairs. In the evenings, they sat at the table and planned how to structure the school, what to charge, how to market it to skeptical frontier families. On the 4th day, Clara rode into Red Hollow alone. Ethan had offered to come with her, but she'd refused. This was something she needed to do herself. She tied the mare outside the general store and went in. Briggs looked up from the counter, his expression souring when he saw her. "Mrs. Calloway," he said, making her new name sound like an insult. "Mr. Briggs, I'd like to place an advertisement in the local paper." "For what?" "I'm opening a school. I'll need to spread the word." Briggs laughed, a harsh sound. "A school? Out at Calloway's place?" "Yes." "You think people are going to send their kids to learn from some Eastern woman who married a failing rancher out of desperation?" Clara kept her voice level. "I think people will send their children anywhere they can get a quality education, and I'm offering one." "Quality education?" Briggs shook his head. "Lady, you don't know anything about this place. These folks don't have money for fancy schools." "Then it's fortunate I'm not running a fancy school. I'm running an affordable one." She handed him the advertisement she'd written. Briggs read it, his expression skeptical. "Room, board, and tuition for $3 a month," he said. "That's barely enough to cover food." "It's enough to start." "And what happens when Calloway's ranch gets foreclosed in 2 days?" "Then we rebuild on the land the bank can't touch." Briggs stared at her. Then, to her surprise, he laughed again. But this time there was something almost admiring in it. "You got guts, I'll give you that," he said. "All right, I'll run your advertisement, but don't say I didn't warn you when nobody shows up." Duly noted. Clara paid for the advertisement with money she didn't really have and walked out. As she was untying the mare, a woman approached her. She was young, maybe 30, with a baby on her hip and exhaustion written all over her face. "Excuse me," the woman said. "Are you really opening a school?" Clara turned. "Yes?" "A boarding school?" "That's the plan." The woman shifted the baby to her other hip. "My oldest is 7. Smart boy, but there's nowhere to send him. Nearest school is 20 miles away." "How many children do you have?" 3. The youngest is this one. She gestured to the baby. "The other 2 are home with my husband." Clara pulled out one of the notices she'd printed. "Here, This has all the details. If you're interested, come by the ranch. We're still setting up, but we should be ready to take students by the end of the month." The woman took the notice, reading it carefully. $3 a month? For everything. Room, board, tuition. That's less than what I pay the neighbor girl to watch them while I work. That's the idea. The woman looked up at Clara, her eyes sharp. Why would you do this? Charge so little, I mean. Clara thought about the question. The honest answer was complicated. Something about needing purpose and trying to salvage something from the wreckage and not wanting to be useless. But she settled for simple. Because children deserve an education, she said, and their families deserve a fair price. The woman studied her for another moment. Then she nodded. I'll talk to my husband. Thank you. Clara rode back to the ranch with 5 notices left out of the 20 she'd printed. 5 families had taken them, asked questions, seemed genuinely interested. It wasn't much, but it was something. When she got back, Ethan was working on the barn, reinforcing the loft where students could eventually sleep. He climbed down when he saw her. How'd it go? He asked. 5 families took notices. That's good. Briggs thinks I'm insane. Briggs thinks everyone's insane. Clara dismounted, her legs aching from the ride. The bank's coming tomorrow. I know. Are you ready? Ethan looked at her and she saw the fear in his eyes, the same fear she felt but refused to name. No, he said, but I don't think that matters. That night, they didn't sleep much. Clara lay in her narrow bed, listening to Ethan moving around in the other room, and thought about everything they were about to lose. The house where a woman named Mary had planted flowers. The barn where Ethan had probably worked alongside his father. The land he'd poured his life into. All of it gone tomorrow. But in the silence between the fear and the grief, Clara felt something else too. Something harder to name. It wasn't hope. Hope was still too dangerous. But maybe it was determination, or maybe just stubbornness. They were going to lose the ranch, but they weren't giving up. And somehow, that made all the difference. The banker arrived at 10 in the morning, driving a black buggy that kicked up dust like a funeral procession. Clara saw him first. She was outside hanging laundry, sheets she'd washed in the creek because the well water was running too low, and her hands froze on the clothesline when she spotted the buggy cresting the ridge. She didn't call out to Ethan right away. Instead, she finished pinning the last sheet, wiped her hands on her apron, and walked slowly toward the house. Ethan was inside, sitting at the table with the ledger open in front of him. He'd been staring at the same page for 20 minutes, like if he looked long enough the numbers might rearrange themselves into something survivable. He's here, Clara said from the doorway. Ethan looked up. His face was blank, carefully controlled, but his hands were gripping the edge of the table hard enough that his knuckles had gone white. All right, he said. He stood, put on his hat, and walked outside. Clara followed. The banker's name was Thornton, and he looked exactly like what he was. A man who'd grown soft counting other people's money. He climbed down from the buggy with the careful movements of someone unused to physical labor, brushing dust from his coat like it had personally offended him. Calloway, he said. Thornton, I assume you know why I'm here? I do. Thornton pulled a leather case from the buggy and extracted a sheaf of papers. The payment was due August 15th. Today is August 20th. You're 5 days past due, and according to my records, you haven't made a payment in 3 months. I know what the records say. Then you also know that the terms of your loan agreement give me the right to foreclose immediately upon default. Ethan didn't answer. Clara watched his jaw tighten, watched him force his breathing to stay even. Thornton glanced at Clara. And who might you be? Clara Calloway? His wife. Thornton's eyebrows rose. Wife? I wasn't aware you'd remarried, Calloway. Recent development. I see. Thornton's expression suggested he saw quite clearly and didn't approve. Well, Mrs. Calloway, I'm afraid your husband's financial situation is rather dire. The bank has been more than patient, but patience has its limits. How much does he owe? Clara asked. $840 plus accrued interest. Call it $900 even. And if he paid it today? Then we wouldn't be having this conversation. But he can't pay it today, can he? Thornton looked at Ethan. Can you? No, Ethan said quietly. Thornton nodded like this confirmed everything he'd expected. Then I'm afraid I have no choice but to proceed with foreclosure proceedings. The property will be seized, along with all assets, including livestock and equipment. You'll have 30 days to vacate. Wait, Clara said. Thornton turned to her. Yes? The property? All of it? The mortgage property, yes. That's how foreclosure works, Mrs. Calloway. I understand that, but I want to be clear. You're foreclosing on the 80 acres that were mortgaged in the original loan agreement, not the full 160. Thornton's expression shifted slightly. I'll need to review the deed. Please do. He went back to his buggy and pulled out another set of papers. Clara stood perfectly still while he read, her heart hammering against her ribs. Beside her, Ethan was so tense she could hear his breathing. Finally, Thornton looked up. It appears you're correct. The eastern 80 acres were purchased outright and aren't part of the mortgage. So the bank has no claim to them? No. But Mrs. Calloway, 80 acres of empty land isn't going to help you much. There's no house, no barn, no infrastructure. And your husband will still lose everything else. I understand. Thornton looked between them, his expression almost pitying. You really think you can make a go of it out here, starting from scratch? We don't have much choice, Clara said. You could leave. Go back east. Start over somewhere civilized. Clara felt anger flash through her, hot and sharp. This is civilized enough for me, Mr. Thornton, and we're staying. Thornton shrugged. Suit yourself. But don't say I didn't warn you. He handed Ethan the foreclosure papers. Sign here, and here. Ethan took the papers. His hand was shaking slightly as he signed his name, each stroke of the pen erasing 3 years of work. When he finished, he handed the papers back without looking at them. You have 30 days, Thornton said. After that, the property reverts to the bank. He climbed back into his buggy, then paused. For what it's worth, Calloway, I'm sorry it came to this. Your wife, the first one, she was a good woman. She deserved better than watching this place fall apart. Ethan's expression went stone cold. Get off my land! Thornton clicked his tongue at the horse and drove away. Clara and Ethan stood in the dust, watching the buggy disappear over the ridge. When it was gone, Ethan turned and walked toward the barn without a word. Clara started to follow, then stopped. Whatever he was feeling right now, he needed space to feel it. So she went back to the laundry instead, pulling down the sheets that had dried in the hot wind, folding them with mechanical precision while her mind raced. 30 days. They had 30 days to move everything they could salvage to the other 80 acres. 30 days to start building something from nothing. 30 days before this house, the one where Mary had lived and died, belonged to strangers. She was folding the last sheet when she heard the crash. It came from the barn. A violent splintering sound followed by another, and another. Clara dropped the sheet and ran. Inside the barn, Ethan had taken an axe to one of the empty stalls. Wood splinters littered the ground, and he was swinging again, his face contorted with rage and grief. The blade bit deep into the beam, stuck. He wrenched it free and swung again. Ethan, Clara said. He didn't stop. Ethan! He froze mid-swing, his chest heaving. Then he lowered the axe slowly and turned to look at her. His eyes were wet. I built this, he said, his voice rough. Mary and we built this together. The barn, the house, all of it. We had plans. We were going to expand, get more cattle, maybe hire help. We were going to build something that lasted. I know. And I failed. I couldn't keep it together. I couldn't save it. You tried. Trying doesn't mean anything if you lose everything anyway. Clara walked closer, carefully, like approaching a wounded animal. You didn't lose everything. Didn't I? No. You still have the land. You still have the cattle until they come to collect them. You still have... She stopped, searching for the right words. You still have a chance. Ethan laughed bitterly. A chance at what? Building another ranch that'll just fail in 3 years? Maybe. Or maybe building something different this time. Like what? Like a school that actually makes money. Like a partnership that works because we're both invested in it. Like a future that isn't just trying to recreate the past. Ethan stared at her. You don't know what you're talking about. Don't I? You think I don't understand loss? You think I didn't have plans that fell apart? I spent 18 years teaching other people's children, watching my friends get married and have families while I got older and more irrelevant. I saved every penny I could, bought a dress I couldn't afford, crossed a continent for a man who took one look at me and decided I wasn't good enough. So don't tell me I don't understand what it's like to fail. Her voice had risen without her meaning it to. She was breathing hard now, all the frustration and fear of the past week pouring out. Ethan set down the axe. I'm sorry. I don't want an apology. I want you to stop destroying things and start thinking about what we're going to do next. What can we do? We can move. We can build. We can keep going. And if it doesn't work, then at least we tried something besides sitting around waiting to lose. Ethan looked at her for a long moment. Then, finally, he nodded. All right. All right? Let's do it. Let's move to the other land and start building. Clara felt relief wash through her. We'll need supplies, lumber, nails, tools. I know. And we'll need to move everything we can before the bank takes it. I know that too. Then let's start now. They spent the rest of the day taking inventory. What could they salvage? What could they move? What was worth fighting for? By evening, they had a list. Tools, the cook stove, as much lumber as they could pull from the barn without collapsing it. Claire's few possessions, Ethan's rifle, blankets, dishes, anything portable that might be useful. That night they sat at the table and made plans. Real plans this time, not desperate hopes. They'd start with a tent structure on the new land, something basic to live in while they built something more permanent. Clara would start teaching immediately, even if it was outdoors at first, even if they only had a handful of students. Every dollar would go toward materials. It's going to be hard, Ethan said. I know. Harder than anything you've done before. Probably. You could still leave, take the train east. I'd understand. Clara looked at him across the table. Are you trying to get rid of me? No, I'm trying to give you an out. I don't want an out. I want to build a school. Why? The question caught her off guard. Clara thought about it, really thought about it. Why was she doing this? It would be easier to leave, to go back to Boston and find another teaching position, to live a quiet, safe, predictable life. But she'd tried safe. She'd tried predictable, and it had left her sitting on a train platform in a wedding dress, waiting for a man who never came. Because, she said finally, I'm tired of other people deciding what I'm worth. The family that said I was too old. The man who thought I wasn't good enough. The school board that passed me over for promotions because I wasn't married. I'm tired of it. So I'm going to build something where I get to decide, where the work I do matters because I say it does. Ethan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, That's a good reason. What's yours? For what? For not giving up. You could sell the land, pay off some debts, start over somewhere else. Ethan looked down at his hands. Mary's buried here. I know. I can't leave her. Clara reached across the table and put her hand over his. His skin was rough, scarred, warm. He looked up, surprised. Then we won't, she said. They sat like that for a moment, hands touching across a scarred wooden table in a house they were about to lose. Then Ethan pulled away gently and stood. I should check the cattle one more time. It's dark. I know, but with the bank taking them soon, I want to make sure they're all right while they're still mine. He left, and Clara sat alone in the quiet house. She looked around at the walls, the fireplace, the window where morning light would come through in a few hours. This place had history, ghosts, a whole life she hadn't been part of. But it wasn't hers to keep. She stood and walked to her room where the wedding dress still lay folded on the bed. She picked it up, feeling the weight of the silk, remembering the hope she'd felt when she'd bought it. Then she carried it outside and laid it carefully in the wagon. It would sell in town, maybe. Someone else could have a wedding that actually meant something. The next morning, they started moving. It was backbreaking work. Everything had to be carried or hauled 8 miles across rough prairie to the new land. The wagon could only hold so much, which meant multiple trips, each one eating up hours they didn't have. But they worked without stopping, without complaint, loading and unloading until their muscles screamed. On the third day, Clara rode into town to sell what they didn't need. The wedding dress, some of Ethan's old tools, a few pieces of furniture. Briggs bought most of it, grumbling the whole time about prices. But he paid cash and didn't ask too many questions. Heard the bank foreclosed, he said as Clara was leaving. They did. Heard you're not leaving, though. We're not. Briggs shook his head. You're either the bravest woman I've ever met or the most foolish. Maybe both. Yeah, he said. Maybe both. When Clara got back to the ranch, she found 3 families waiting. They were standing near the house, looking uncertain. 2 couples with children and a single mother with a boy who looked about 8. Clara recognized the woman from town, the one who'd taken the first notice. Mrs. Calloway, the woman said. Clara climbed down from the wagon. Yes? I'm Sarah Mitchell. We spoke in town. About the school? I remember. These are the Johnsons and the Larsons. We all saw your advertisement. Sarah gestured to her son. This is Daniel. We were wondering if the school was still happening. Clara looked at them standing there with their children, holding her notices, hoping for something better. Then she looked at the house she was about to lose, the barn half empty, the land that wasn't hers anymore. She could have told them the truth, could have explained that the school was a dream built on desperation, that they hadn't even started building yet, that she had no classrooms or books or anything except determination. Instead, she said, yes, the school is still happening. When can they start? One of the other mothers asked. Monday. Where? Good question. Clara thought fast. We're relocating to new property, better facilities. She had no idea if this was true, but it sounded better than we're being foreclosed on and living in a tent. Can your children ride? Daniel can, Sarah said. The others might need help. Then bring them Monday morning. I'll have everything ready. The families exchanged glances, then nodded. They paid the first month's tuition in cash, $9 total, 3 children, and left. Clara stood holding the money, feeling the weight of it. $9. It was nothing compared to what they owed, but it was something. When Ethan came back from another supply run, she showed him the money and explained about the families. You told them we'd be ready by Monday? He said. Yes. Clara, we don't even have walls yet. Then we'd better build some. Ethan looked at her, then at the money, then back at her. You're serious? Completely. We have 4 days. I can count. This is insane. You keep saying that, but we keep doing it anyway. Ethan laughed, actually laughed, the first time Clara had heard him make that sound. Yeah, I guess we do. They worked through the night by lamplight, and through the next day, and the day after that. The tent structure went up first, big enough for Clara and Ethan to sleep in and for students to gather during the day. Then Ethan started on something more permanent, a frame building, rough but solid, using lumber they'd salvaged from the barn. Clara set up the interior, creating a teaching space with benches made from planks, a makeshift desk, a slate board Ethan had found in town. It wasn't pretty, but it was functional. On Sunday night, she stood in the tent that would serve as her classroom and looked at what they'd built. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. Monday morning came too fast. Clara woke in the tent, her body aching from sleeping on the ground, and tried to calm her racing heart. Today was the first day of school. Today she'd have actual students, actual responsibility, actual proof that this wasn't just a desperate fantasy. She dressed carefully in her best remaining dress, pinned up her hair, and tried to look like someone who knew what she was doing. Ethan was already up, working on the frame building. He'd barely slept, determined to get the walls finished before winter. When he saw her, he stopped. You look nervous, he said. I am nervous. You've been teaching for 18 years. Not like this. Not in a tent on land we just started building on. Not with everything riding on whether these families think I'm competent. Ethan set down his hammer and walked over. You are competent. You're the most competent person I know. You barely know me. I know enough. Clara looked at him, this man she'd married in desperation, who'd become something like a partner. What if I fail? Then we figure out what comes next. But you won't fail. How do you know? Because you haven't yet. The families started arriving around 8. Sarah Mitchell came first with Daniel, the boy sitting proudly on his own horse. Then the Johnsons, parents, and 2 children in a wagon. Finally, the Larsons, who'd ridden together on one tired-looking mare. Clara greeted each family, showed them the tent, explained the schedule. The children ranged from 7 to 12, 3 boys and 2 girls, all of them looking at her with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. "All right," she said once the parents had left. "Welcome to school." The first day was chaos. The tent was too hot, the benches too hard, the slate board too small. The children were restless, unused to sitting still, testing boundaries. Daniel asked questions faster than Clara could answer them. One of the Johnson children kept trying to leave. A girl named Emma refused to speak at all. But Clara had handled difficult students before. She'd taught in Boston classrooms with 40 children and one broken chalkboard. She could handle 5 kids in a tent. She started with reading, having each child take turns with the few books she'd brought from Boston. Then mathematics, using stones to teach counting and basic arithmetic. By noon, they were exhausted, and so was she. Lunch was bread and cheese, eaten sitting on the ground outside the tent. Ethan joined them, and the children immediately started asking him questions about ranching, about the cattle, about the wolves. "You ever shot one?" Daniel asked. "A few times." "Can you show us?" "Maybe later, if your teacher says it's all right." 5 pairs of eyes turned to Clara. She sighed. "After lessons are done, if there's time." The afternoon went better. They did geography, using a map Clara had drawn on the back of an old feed sack. Then history, telling stories about the Revolution and the Constitution. The children were more engaged now, less restless. By the time the parents came to collect them at 4, Clara was exhausted but satisfied. The day hadn't been perfect, but it hadn't been a disaster either. Sarah Mitchell was the last to leave. She lingered while Daniel climbed onto his horse, looking at the tent, the half-built frame structure, the rough prairie stretching out in all directions. "This isn't what I expected," she said. Clara's heart sank. "I know it's not much, but no, I mean it's better. My boy hasn't stopped talking since I picked him up. He's learned more today than in the last 6 months combined." "Really?" "Really. You're doing something good here, Mrs. Calloway. Don't let anyone tell you different." Sarah rode away with Daniel, and Clara stood watching them go, feeling something warm and unfamiliar in her chest. Pride, maybe. Or hope. That night, she and Ethan sat outside the tent, eating dinner in the fading light. The frame building was taking shape behind them, walls rising slowly from the prairie floor. $9, Clara said. "That's what we made today." "It's a start. It's not enough." "Not yet. But if we get more students, we will. We have to." Ethan looked at her. "You really think this is going to work?" Clara thought about the question. A week ago, she would have said no. A week ago, she was sitting on a train platform in a wedding dress, her whole life crumbling. Now she was sitting on the ground in the middle of nowhere, eating beans from a tin plate, planning a future with a man she barely knew. And somehow, impossibly, she felt more alive than she had in years. "I don't know," she said honestly. "But I want to find out." Ethan nodded. "Then let's find out together." They finished eating in comfortable silence, watching the stars come out one by one over the Wyoming prairie. Somewhere in the distance, the wolves started howling. But tonight they sounded farther away. Tomorrow they'd keep building, keep teaching, keep moving forward, because that's what you did when you ran out of other options. You kept going. By the end of the second week, they had 7 students. Word had spread faster than Clara expected. The Mitchell boy couldn't stop talking about the school, and his enthusiasm was contagious. 2 more families showed up on Wednesday morning, apologetic about being late, but their children eager to start. Clara welcomed them, found space on the crowded benches, and kept teaching. The money helped. $21 a month wasn't going to make them rich, but it bought lumber and nails and food. More importantly, it bought time. The frame building was nearly finished now. Ethan worked on it every spare moment, sometimes by lamplight after dark, his silhouette moving against the canvas of stars. Clara would watch him from the tent opening, the stranger she'd married, and feel something shift inside her chest. Not love. She wasn't ready to call it that. But maybe respect. Maybe gratitude. Maybe the beginning of something she didn't have a name for yet. One evening, she brought him coffee while he was hammering the last of the roof boards into place. "You should rest," she said. "Almost done." "You said that 2 hours ago." Ethan paused, wiping sweat from his forehead despite the cool air. "If we get this weatherproof before the rain comes, we can move the students inside, make it a real classroom." "It's already a real classroom. You know what I mean. Clara did know. The tent was functional, but it was also temporary, fragile. A strong wind could collapse it. Rain would turn the floor to mud. They needed something solid. "Come down anyway," she said. "Eat something." Ethan climbed down the ladder, moving carefully in the darkness. He took the coffee and drank half of it in one long swallow. "The Johnsons asked me today if we'd consider boarding students," Clara said. "What'd you tell them?" "That we'd think about it. We don't have space for boarding." "Not yet, but if we finish the building, we could partition off a section, set up bunks." Ethan looked at the structure he'd been building. That'd mean more students, more money, and more responsibility. "You think you can handle it?" Clara bristled slightly. "I handled 40 students in Boston. I think I can manage a handful here." "That's not what I meant." "Then what did you mean?" Ethan was quiet for a moment, choosing his words. "I mean, it's different when they're living here, when they're your responsibility all the time, not just during school hours. If something happens, if a kid gets sick or hurt, that's on us." "I know that." "Do you?" "Because this isn't Boston, Clara. We don't have a doctor nearby. We don't have supplies or help or backup. It's just us." "I'm aware. Are you?" His voice had an edge now. "Because you keep pushing for more, for bigger, like you're trying to prove something." Clara felt anger flash hot in her veins. "Maybe I am trying to prove something. Is that a problem?" "It is if you're taking on more than we can handle. We don't have a choice. We need the money. Not if it means putting kids at risk. I would never put children at risk. Not on purpose, but what if something happens that you're not prepared for?" Clara set down her own cup with more force than necessary. "Then we deal with it, the same way we've dealt with everything else, by figuring it out as we go." "That's not good enough when you're responsible for other people's children." "Then what do you suggest? We turn away students? We stop trying to build something that actually works?" "I'm suggesting we be realistic about our limitations." "Realistic?" Clara laughed bitterly. "You keep using that word. You know what's realistic? Going back to Boston and finding another teaching job where I'm overlooked and underpaid for the rest of my life. You know what's realistic? You losing this land too because we didn't try hard enough. Is that the kind of realistic you want?" Ethan stared at her, his jaw tight. "That's not fair." "None of this is fair, but we're doing it anyway." They stood there in the darkness, anger crackling between them like static before a storm. Finally, Ethan said, "I'm trying to protect you." "I don't need protection. I need a partner." "You have one." "Then trust me to know what I can handle." Ethan looked at her for a long moment, and Clara could see him wrestling with something. Finally, he nodded. "All right, we'll try boarding, but we start small. 2 students, maybe 3. See how it goes." 4. "Clara." 4 students. That's $12 extra a month. We need it. Ethan sighed. "Fine. 4. But that's the limit until we see how it works." Agreed. They finished their coffee in tense silence. When Ethan went back to work on the roof, Clara retreated to the tent and tried to calm her racing heart. The argument had shaken her more than she wanted to admit. They'd been working so well together, finding a rhythm, and now this. But maybe this was part of partnership too. The disagreements, the conflicts, the pushing back and forth until you found something that worked. She hoped so, anyway. 3 days later, the first real storm hit. It started as dark clouds gathering on the western horizon, moving fast. Ethan saw them during the afternoon and immediately started securing everything he could, tying down the tent, moving supplies inside the frame building, getting the few remaining cattle into what passed for shelter. Clara was teaching when the wind picked up. The children noticed it first, their attention drifting from the lesson to the canvas walls rippling and snapping. "Is it going to storm?" Emma asked. She'd started talking more in the past week, her shyness slowly fading. "Looks like it," Clara said, trying to keep her voice calm. "Should we go home?" one of the Johnson boys asked. Clara looked outside. The sky had turned a sickly green color, and the wind was strong enough now that she could hear it howling. "Let's wait a bit. See how bad it gets." 10 minutes later, the rain started. It came all at once, a wall of water that turned the world gray. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in seconds. Thunder cracked so loud that Emma screamed, and the other children huddled together on the benches. "It's all right," Clara said, though her own heart was pounding. "We're safe inside." But were they? The tent was shaking violently now, the stakes holding but barely. Water was already pooling on the floor, seeping through the canvas. If the wind got much stronger, the whole thing could collapse. The door flap flew open, and Ethan stumbled in, soaked through. "We need to move to the building. Now." "Is it finished?" "Finished enough. Come on." Clara gathered the children quickly. "Everyone stay together. Hold hands. Don't let go." They ran through the rain, a chain of small bodies and one terrified teacher, splashing through mud that grabbed at their boots. The distance was only 50 yards, but it felt like miles. Lightning split the sky, close enough that Clara could smell the ozone. Ethan got the door open and herded them inside. The building was rough. No windows yet, gaps in the walls where the boards didn't quite meet, but it was solid. The roof held. They were out of the rain. Clara did a quick head count. 5 children, all accounted for. All soaked and shivering, but safe. "Everyone all right?" she asked. Nods all around. Emma was crying quietly, and one of the older boys looked pale, but no one was hurt. Ethan found some blankets they'd stored in the corner and passed them out. "Storm should pass soon. These things blow through fast." He was wrong. The storm didn't pass. It got worse. The wind picked up until the building shook, and rain drove through the gaps in the walls. Thunder rolled continuously now, a deep rumbling that you could feel in your chest. Through the spaces between boards, Clara could see the tent collapsing, canvas ripping free from stakes and flying across the prairie like a ghost. "I need to check the cattle," Ethan said. "You can't go out in this. If they panic and run, we'll lose them. If you go out there, you could get killed." Clara, no. She grabbed his arm. "You're not going." "Those cattle are all we have left. We have more than cattle. We have each other. We have these children. We have—" She stopped, searching for words. "We have something worth not dying for." Ethan looked at her, water dripping from his hair, his expression torn. Finally, he nodded. "All right, I'll stay." The storm raged for 3 hours. Clara kept the children distracted as best she could, telling stories, teaching songs, anything to keep their minds off the thunder and the lightning and the wind that sounded like it wanted to tear the world apart. Ethan paced like a caged animal, checking the door every few minutes, watching the sky. When the rain finally stopped, it stopped as suddenly as it had started. One moment the world was drowning, the next it was silent except for water dripping and the occasional rumble of distant thunder. Ethan opened the door carefully. The prairie looked like a battlefield. The tent was completely destroyed, shredded canvas scattered across mud and standing water. Their carefully organized supplies were strewn everywhere, some of it probably blown halfway to the next county. And in the distance, Claire could see the cattle clustered together, still there, still alive. "We got lucky," Ethan said quietly. Claire wasn't sure luck was the right word. But they'd survived. That was something. The children's parents came as soon as the roads were passable, frantic with worry. Clara assured each of them that their children were fine, just wet and tired. Sarah Mitchell hugged her son so hard he complained, then turned to Clara. "Thank you," she said, "for keeping him safe." "Of course." "No, I mean it. You could have sent them home when you saw the storm coming, but you kept them here, kept them safe. That means something." After the families left, Clara and Ethan stood surveying the damage. The tent was a total loss. Most of their food stores were ruined. The few books Clara had brought from Boston were soaked through. But the building had held, and more importantly, no one was hurt. "We need to finish this place," Ethan said. "Get it weatherproof. Real windows, better walls, a proper door. That'll take time and money. I know. But after today," he shook his head, "we can't keep doing this halfway. Either we build something that lasts, or we don't build at all." Clara nodded. "Then we build something that lasts." Over the next 2 weeks, they worked with a new urgency. Ethan hired 2 men from town to help with the building, spending money they didn't really have but couldn't afford not to spend. Clara taught during the day and helped with construction in the evenings, learning to measure boards and hammer nails straight. The students noticed the changes. They saw their teacher with sawdust in her hair and calluses on her hands. They saw Ethan working past dark, refusing to quit even when he was exhausted. And something shifted in how they approached their own lessons. They worked harder, complained less, took pride in being part of something that was being built from nothing. Daniel Mitchell started arriving early to help Ethan with morning chores. Emma began staying after lessons to help Clara clean up. The other children followed their example, and soon the school felt less like a job and more like a community. One afternoon, a stranger rode up while Clara was teaching mathematics. He was well-dressed, riding a good horse, clearly not from around here. Clara stepped outside to meet him. "Can I help you?" "I'm looking for Mrs. Calloway, Clara Calloway." "That's me." The man dismounted and pulled an envelope from his saddlebag. "I'm James Crawford, attorney from Cheyenne. I have a letter for you, from Boston." Clara's heart stuttered. She took the envelope with shaking hands. The handwriting on the front was familiar, her sister's. "Thank you," she managed. Crawford tipped his hat and rode away. Clara stood holding the letter, afraid to open it. She hadn't written to her family since leaving Boston. Hadn't told them about the failed wedding, the desperate marriage, any of it. What could her sister possibly have to say? Inside, the children were getting restless without her. Clara tucked the letter into her pocket and went back to teaching. But her mind kept drifting to it, wondering what news it carried, good or bad. That evening, after the students left, she finally opened it. The letter was short, written in her sister Margaret's careful hand. Clara read it twice, then a third time, trying to process the words. Ethan found her sitting on the steps of the new building, the letter in her lap, staring at nothing. "What's wrong?" he asked. Clara handed him the letter without speaking. He read it silently, his expression changing. When he finished, he looked at her. "Your father died." "Yes." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. We weren't close." "Still." Clara took the letter back, folding it carefully. "Margaret says he left me something in his will. Not much. He gave most of it to my brother. But there's money. $500. Ethan went very still. $500. "Yes. That's enough to pay off most of what you owed the bank. Maybe buy back some of the land." "Clara, shh." "Or," she continued, "it's enough to finish this building properly. Buy supplies for the school. Maybe start construction on a real boarding house." Ethan sat down beside her. "That money is yours." "I know. You could use it to go back to Boston. Set yourself up comfortably." "I could. Is that what you want?" Clara looked at the building they'd been constructing, at the prairie stretching out under the evening sky, at the place where their destroyed tent used to stand. She thought about her father, who'd never approved of her choice to teach, who'd always made her feel like she was failing by not getting married, who died without ever seeing what she'd built here. "No," she said. "That's not what I want." "Then what do you want?" Clara turned to look at him. "I want to build something that's mine, ours. I want to prove that the choice we made wasn't insane. I want—" She stopped, searching for the right words. "I want this to work." Ethan was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "If we use that money for the school, there's no going back, no safety net. We're all in. I know. And if it fails, then we fail together. But at least we tried." Ethan looked at her, and Clara saw something in his expression that she hadn't seen before. Not just respect or gratitude, something deeper. "All right," he said quietly. "Let's do it." They used Margaret's letter to secure credit at the general store in Red Hollow, with the promise of the inheritance money coming soon. Briggs was skeptical but agreed, probably because he was curious to see if they'd actually pull it off. With real resources, things moved faster. The building got proper windows, a wood stove for heat, bunks for boarding students. Clara ordered books from a supplier in Cheyenne, real textbooks instead of the few battered volumes she'd brought from Boston. Ethan built desks, proper ones with smooth surfaces and storage underneath. By October, they were ready. Clara put out new advertisements, this time for boarding students. The response was immediate. Families who lived too far for daily travel, who'd been teaching their children at home, or not at all, suddenly had an option. Within 2 weeks, they had 4 boarding students, 2 boys and 2 girls, ranging from 9 to 14. They arrived on a Sunday with their parents, carrying small trunks and looking nervous. Clara gave them the same tour she'd given the day's students, showed them the bunks, explained the rules. Meals at set times, chores before and after lessons, respectful behavior expected at all times. Lights out at 8. The parents seemed satisfied. They paid the first month's board, gave their children fierce hugs, and rode away. And just like that, Clara and Ethan became responsible for 4 children, day and night. The first week was chaos. One of the boys got homesick and cried himself to sleep every night. One of the girls refused to eat anything Clara cooked, claiming it wasn't made right. The other 2 fought constantly over everything from blanket space to who got to sit where during lessons. Clara had handled difficult students before, but never like this. Never with the constant, relentless responsibility of feeding them, housing them, keeping them safe and healthy every single moment. She was exhausted within 3 days. Ethan helped where he could, but he was juggling his own work, finishing construction projects, maintaining the property, trying to figure out what to do about income now that the cattle were gone. They were surviving on the school money, but just barely. One night, Clara found him outside long after dark, sitting on the steps with his head in his hands. "Can't sleep?" she asked. "Too much to think about." She sat beside him. "Like what?" "Like how we're going to make it through winter. Like whether we can actually feed 4 extra mouths on what we're bringing in. Like what happens if one of those kids gets sick and we can't afford a doctor." "We'll figure it out." "Will we?" Clara didn't have an answer for that, because she had the same worries, the same fears. They were making it work, but just barely. One unexpected expense, one bad break, and the whole thing could collapse. "I'm scared," she said quietly. Ethan looked at her, surprised. "You? You're the most fearless person I know." "That's not true. You married a stranger, moved to the middle of nowhere, started a school from nothing, because I was terrified of going back to what I had before. That's not bravery. That's desperation." Maybe they're the same thing. Clara thought about that. Maybe he was right. Maybe courage was just desperation with better marketing. "I don't know if we can do this," she said. "Neither do I. But we're trying anyway." "Yeah." They sat in silence, 2 people who'd gambled everything on a partnership born from desperation, watching the stars wheel overhead and wondering if they were brave or just foolish. The answer, Clara suspected, was probably both. Inside, one of the children coughed. Clara stood. "I should check on them." "Clara?" She turned. "Thank you," Ethan said, "for using your inheritance on this, for staying, for—" He stopped, searching for words. "For being here." Clara felt something warm bloom in her chest. "You're welcome." She went inside and checked on the children. The homesick boy had finally fallen asleep, tear tracks still visible on his cheeks. The picky eater was curled up small under her blanket. The 2 who fought were sleeping back to back, close despite their daytime animosity. Clara pulled blankets up, tucked in loose corners, made sure everyone was warm. These children, she realized, were hers now. Not legally, not permanently, but in the way that mattered. She was responsible for them. For their safety, their education, their well-being. It was terrifying. It was also the most important thing she'd ever done. She walked back outside and found Ethan still sitting on the steps. Without thinking about it too hard, she sat beside him and leaned her head against his shoulder. He stiffened for a moment, surprised. Then, slowly, he put his arm around her. They sat like that for a long time, holding each other up in the darkness. 2 people who'd started as strangers and become something else. Not quite friends, not quite partners, but something in between. Something that might, eventually, become more. But that was a thought for another day. For now, this was enough. Winter came early that year, arriving in November with snow that fell for 3 days straight. Clara woke on the first morning to find everything white. The prairie, the building, the path to the creek all buried under 6 inches of powder. Inside, the children were huddled near the wood stove, breath misting in the cold air despite the fire Ethan had started before dawn. "Is school canceled?" one of the boys asked hopefully. "No," Clara said, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. "Get dressed. Breakfast in 20 minutes. There were groans, but they obeyed. Clara had learned in the past month that consistency mattered more than kindness when it came to managing boarding students. They needed structure, routine, something solid to hold on to. She made oatmeal with the last of the milk and some dried apples. It wasn't much, but it was hot and filling. The children ate without complaint, which was progress from the first week when every meal had been a negotiation. After breakfast, lessons. Clara had them working on different subjects based on age and skill level, the younger ones on reading and basic arithmetic, the older ones on history and more advanced mathematics. It was exhausting keeping track of multiple lessons at once, but she'd developed a system. Around mid-morning, Ethan came in stamping snow from his boots. "We got a problem," he said quietly. Claire looked up from helping Emma with her reading. "What kind of problem?" "The roof on the old house collapsed, the one the bank took." "So?" "So the cattle I moved there yesterday for shelter are now standing in the open, and there's another storm coming tonight." Clara's stomach dropped. The cattle were supposed to have been sold by now, but the bank had been slow processing the seizure. Ethan had been caring for them in the meantime, using the old property because it still had some standing structures. "What do we do?" Clara asked. "I need to move them here, to our land. We don't have shelter for that many animals." "I know, but I can't leave them in the open. They'll freeze." Clara looked at the children, at the lesson plans she'd carefully prepared, at the stack of work that needed grading. Then she looked at Ethan, at the worry etched across his face. "How long will it take?" "Most of the day. Maybe longer if the weather turns." "Then you'd better get started." "Clara." "I'll manage here. Go." Ethan looked at her for a long moment, gratitude and something else flickering across his expression. Then he nodded and left. Clara turned back to her students. "Change of plans? We're going to have a practical lesson today." The children perked up. Practical lessons usually meant doing something instead of sitting at desks. "Mr. Calloway is moving cattle today, which means tonight we're going to have animals on our property that need shelter. So we're going to build it." Daniel's hand shot up. "We're going to build a barn?" "Not a barn. We don't have time or materials for that. But we can build a windbreak, something to protect them from the worst of the weather." She had no idea if this would actually work, but sitting inside doing lessons while Ethan struggled alone felt wrong. And the children needed to learn that education wasn't just books and lectures. Sometimes it was solving problems with whatever you had. They bundled up and went outside. The snow had stopped, but the temperature was dropping fast. Clara organized them into teams, some gathering branches and scrub brush. Others helping Ethan had left behind arrange lumber into a rough L shape against the side of the building. It was messy, chaotic work. The children complained about the cold, about their wet gloves, about how heavy the branches were. But they kept working. By noon, they'd constructed something that might charitably be called a windbreak. It wasn't pretty, but it would block the worst of the wind from the north. They trooped back inside, wet and cold, but strangely energized. Clara made hot water with honey and had them drink it while they warmed up by the stove. "That was better than reading," one of the Johnson boys said. "Reading is important too," Clara replied, "but so is knowing how to solve problems. Today you learned both." Emma raised her hand. "How did we learn reading?" "Because building that shelter required planning. You had to think about wind direction, structural support, resource allocation. Those are all things you learn from books, but you have to apply them in the real world." The children looked at each other, processing this. Clara could see the gears turning, the realization that school wasn't just preparation for someday, it was tools they could use right now. That afternoon, she had them write about the experience, what they learned, what was hard, what they'd do differently next time. The writing was rough, full of spelling errors and grammatical mistakes, but it was honest, real. Ethan returned just before dark with 12 head of cattle, all of them looking miserable and half frozen. He drove them into the makeshift shelter the children had built, and Clara watched from the window as he stood there for a moment looking at the rough construction, clearly trying to figure out who'd made it. When he came inside, his first words were, "Did the kids build that?" "We all did." "It's..." He stopped, searching for words. "It's actually not bad." "Don't sound so surprised." "I'm not. I'm just..." He shook his head. "Thank you." That night, the second storm hit harder than the first. Wind screamed across the prairie, driving snow horizontal. The building shook but held. The cattle huddled together in the windbreak, protected from the worst of it. Clara lay awake, listening to the wind, thinking about everything that had happened since that day on the train platform. 3 months. It had only been 3 months, but it felt like years. She'd gone from being a woman with no future to someone responsible for children's education, for a school, for a partnership with a man she was starting to understand, starting to care about. That thought scared her more than the foreclosure, more than the poverty, more than any of it. Because caring meant vulnerability. It meant the possibility of loss. And Clara had lost enough. The storm passed by morning, leaving everything frozen and white. The cattle had survived. The building was intact. They'd made it through another crisis. But the relief was short-lived. 2 days later, the inheritance money arrived. Crawford, the attorney, brought it personally, $500 in banknotes, along with papers that needed signing. Clara read through them carefully while he waited, her teacher's instincts automatically checking for errors or deceptions. Everything seemed in order. "Your father's estate has been settled," Crawford said. "This is your portion. Your sister sends her regards and asks that you write when you can." Clara thought about Margaret, about the family she'd left behind. They probably thought she was crazy, running off to Wyoming, marrying a stranger. Maybe they were right, but crazy had gotten her farther than careful ever had. She signed the papers and took the money. Crawford left, and Clara stood holding more cash than she'd seen in her entire life. Ethan found her like that, standing in the middle of the room, staring at the bills. "That's a lot of money," he said quietly. "Yes. You could still leave, Take this and go back east. Start over somewhere comfortable." Clara looked at him. "Do you want me to leave?" "No, but I want you to know you have a choice." "I made my choice already." "Circumstances change. You don't owe me anything, Clara. We made an agreement, but if you want to, I don't want to." The words came out sharper than she intended. "I'm not leaving, Ethan. I'm investing this money in the school, in our future. That's what I want." Ethan studied her face. "You're sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything." He nodded slowly. "All right then, let's put it to good use." Over the next month, they transformed the property. The money bought proper building materials, not salvaged scraps. It bought books and slates and supplies. It bought food stores for the winter, medicine for the small infirmary Clara set up in one corner. It bought security, however temporary. Word spread. By December, they had 10 students total, 6 boarding, 4-day students. The building was crowded but functional. Clara taught from dawn until evening, managing multiple grade levels and subjects, somehow keeping it all organized in her head. She was exhausted, but she was also happier than she'd been in years. One evening in mid-December, Sarah Mitchell stopped by after picking up Daniel. She found Clara outside, taking a rare moment to watch the sunset. "You've built something remarkable here," Sarah said. Clara looked at the building, at the smoke rising from the chimney, at the carefully maintained paths through the snow. "We're trying." "No, you've succeeded. My son reads at a level I never thought possible. The Peterson girl, she never spoke before coming here? Now she won't stop talking. You've changed these children's lives." "That's generous, but it's the truth." Sarah turned to face her. "I wanted you to know that some of the families are talking about pooling resources, building a proper schoolhouse on your land, something bigger. We'd fund it collectively, and you'd run it." Clara's breath caught. I know it's a lot to consider, but we believe in what you're doing, and we want to help make it permanent." After Sarah left, Clara stood in the fading light, processing the offer. A real school, funded by the community, permanent. It was everything she'd hoped for. It was also terrifying. She found Ethan in the barn checking on the cattle. He looked up when she entered. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said. "Sarah Mitchell just offered to help build a real school with community funding." Ethan set down the feed bucket. "That's good news." "Is it?" "Why wouldn't it be?" "Because it makes this real, permanent. Not just something we're trying, but something we're committing to long term." "I thought that's what we wanted." "It is. Clara struggled for words. "What if we fail? What if we build this thing and it doesn't work?" Ethan walked over and took her hands. His were rough, calloused, warm. "We've already failed, Clara. I lost the ranch. You lost your future in Boston. We started from nothing and built this. That's not failure. That's just life." "But what if we succeed? What if we build something that actually lasts? Isn't that worth the risk?" Clara looked into his eyes and saw the same fear she felt, the same uncertainty. But she also saw determination, trust, partnership. "Yes," she said finally, "it's worth the risk." They told the families at a community meeting the following week. The response was overwhelming. Every family pledged what they could: money, labor, materials. Even Briggs from the general store offered to donate supplies at cost. Construction would start in spring. That Christmas was the first Clara had spent not alone in nearly 10 years. The boarding students couldn't go home. Their families lived too far and the weather was too uncertain. So she and Ethan made Christmas there, at the school. They couldn't afford much, but Clara taught the children to make decorations from scraps of fabric and paper. Ethan cut a small pine tree and they decorated it with strings of dried berries. For dinner, they made do with what they had: roasted chicken, potatoes, biscuits that were slightly burned but edible. It wasn't fancy, but it was warm and loud and full of life. After the children went to bed, Clara and Ethan sat by the stove sharing the last of the coffee. "This is the first Christmas I haven't spent alone since Mary died," Ethan said quietly. "Is it hard? Being here instead of—" "No, it's different, but different is good." Clara sipped her coffee, thinking. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure. Do you think Mary would approve of what we're doing here?" Ethan was quiet for a long moment. "I think she'd hate that I lost the ranch, but I think she'd understand why I'm trying again. Mary always believed in building things that mattered." "Like we are now?" "Yeah, like we are now." Clara set down her cup. "I got you something." "Clara, we agreed no gifts." "I know, but I made this before we agreed." She pulled out a package wrapped in brown paper. Ethan opened it carefully and found a shirt inside, simple, well-made, with buttons she'd sewn on herself. "The other one was wearing through at the elbows," Clara said. "I noticed you trying to mend it." Ethan held the shirt, his expression unreadable. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wooden box. "I made this for you," he said. Clara opened it and found a pair of hair combs inside, carved from dark wood with simple but elegant designs. "I saw yours were broken," Ethan said. "Thought you might need new ones." Clara traced the carvings with her finger, feeling tears prick her eyes. "They're beautiful. They're just wood. They're perfect." They sat there in the quiet, holding their gifts, and Clara felt something shift between them. This wasn't the desperate partnership of two strangers anymore. This was something deeper, built slowly through shared work and shared fears and shared hope. "Clara," Ethan said softly. She looked up. "I know we started this as a business arrangement, but somewhere along the way, it became more than that. For me, anyway." Clara's heart was pounding. "For me, too. I don't know what that means exactly, and I'm not good with words or—" Clara reached over and took his hand. "You're doing fine. What I'm trying to say is, I care about you, not just as a partner or a friend, as—" He stopped, frustrated. "I don't know what to call it." "You don't have to call it anything," Clara said. "We can just let it be what it is." "And what is it?" Clara thought about the question. What were they? Not quite married, not in the way that mattered, but not strangers either. Something in between, still being defined. "We're us," she said finally. "Whatever that means." Ethan smiled, and Clara realized it was the first real smile she'd seen from him. Not a half smile or a grimace, but genuine warmth. "I can live with that," he said. That night, Clara lay in her bed. They still kept separate rooms, still maintained that boundary, and thought about the future. Spring would bring construction on the new school. Summer would bring more students, more responsibility. There would be challenges, setbacks, probably more near disasters. But there would also be this, moments of quiet understanding, of partnership, of building something meaningful. And that was enough. Spring came late, arriving in early April with muddy ground and the first hints of green. The community showed up in force to start construction on the new schoolhouse. Men brought tools and lumber. Women brought food and organization. Even some of the older students helped, carrying materials and learning carpentry. The building went up faster than Clara expected. Within 2 months, they had a real schoolhouse. 2 rooms, proper windows, a bell tower that could be heard for miles. It wasn't fancy, but it was solid, built to last. The day they moved in, Clara stood in the empty classroom and felt tears streaming down her face. Ethan found her like that, crying in the middle of the room. "What's wrong?" he asked. "Nothing. Everything. I don't know." She wiped her eyes. 6 months ago, I was sitting on a train platform with nowhere to go. And now I have this. We have this. Yes, We. Ethan walked over and pulled her into his arms. Clara let herself lean into him, let herself feel the solid warmth of another person who cared. We did it, she whispered. Yeah, we did. By fall, they had 18 students. The school was thriving. Clara hired an assistant teacher, a young woman from town who'd heard about the school and wanted to be part of it. The extra help meant Clara could focus on administration and curriculum development. The money was tight but steady. They weren't getting rich, but they were surviving. Building slowly toward something sustainable. One October evening, a year and 2 months after their wedding, Clara and Ethan walked together to the train station in Red Hollow. They'd been invited to speak at an education conference in Cheyenne, but Clara had suggested they make a stop first. They stood on the same platform where they'd met, looking at the same bench where Clara had sat in her wedding dress. Feels like a lifetime ago, Ethan said. It was a lifetime ago. We're different people now. Better people? Clara thought about it. I don't know about better, but more complete maybe. Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out 2 simple gold bands. I've been carrying these around for 3 months, trying to figure out when to give them to you. Claire's breath caught. Ethan, I know we're already married, but I want to do it again. Properly this time. Not because we're desperate or running out of options, but because I choose you. Because I want to build this life with you. We're already building it. I know. But I want it to be real. All of it. Clara looked at the rings, then at Ethan, then back at the bench where everything had started. When I sat here that day, I thought my life was over. I thought I'd run out of chances. And now? Now I know that sometimes the best things come from the worst moments. That taking a risk on something impossible can lead to something real. She took the rings from him. Yes. Let's do it properly this time. They exchanged rings right there on the platform, with no witnesses except the evening wind and the distant sound of a train whistle. No preacher, no ceremony, just 2 people choosing each other again. When they kissed, it felt like coming home. The train to Cheyenne arrived, and they boarded together. As it pulled away from Red Hollow, Clara looked back at the town that had become theirs. She thought about the school they'd built, about the children they taught, about the community they'd become part of. She thought about the partnership that had started as desperation and become something like love. Most of all, she thought about courage. Not the loud, dramatic kind, but the quiet, everyday kind. The courage to keep going when everything seemed impossible. The courage to try again after failing. The courage to build something new from the wreckage of old dreams. That was the real story, she realized. Not the romantic meeting or the dramatic rescue. Just 2 people who'd refused to give up, who'd chosen to try one more time, who'd built something meaningful from nothing but determination and hope. The train carried them east toward Cheyenne, toward new opportunities and challenges. But Clara knew they'd come back. Because home wasn't Boston or even Red Hollow. Home was what they'd built together, a school, a partnership, a life. And that was worth everything. Beside her, Ethan reached over and took her hand. She squeezed back and they sat in comfortable silence as the Wyoming prairie rolled past the window. 2 people who'd started as strangers, who'd made the most reckless decision of their lives, who'd somehow turned desperation into hope. Who'd learned that sometimes the best thing you can do when you've lost everything is to take one more chance. Sometimes the boldest choice isn't the safe one. It's the one that scares you most. The one that makes no sense on paper, but feels right in your gut. Clara had learned that lesson sitting on a train platform in a wedding dress. Ethan had learned it when he'd approached a stranger and proposed marriage. And together, they'd proven that courage doesn't mean not being afraid. It means being terrified and doing it anyway. The school would grow. New students would come. There would be more storms, more challenges, more moments of doubt. But they'd face them together, these 2 people who'd gambled on each other and won. Not because everything worked out perfectly, but because they'd been willing to try. And in the end, that was all that mattered. The sun was setting as the train carried them toward their future, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Clara leaned her head on Ethan's shoulder and closed her eyes, feeling more at peace than she had in years. They'd built something from nothing. They'd turned loss into possibility. They'd created a home, a school, a life. They'd survived. More than that, they'd thrived. And that, Clara thought, was the greatest victory of all.